3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello, carbon-based listeners and silicon-powered friends. Welcome to Mastering the Machine, the podcast where humans and automation collide in perfect harmony. I'm your host, Frank Lamb, and whether you're flesh and blood or circuits and code, we're here to explore industrial automation together. From factory floors to digital cores, we're exploring how machines are reshaping our world, one algorithm at a time. So plug in, power up, and let's master the machine together. So why am I doing this topic today? This is my first podcast, though I've been doing webinars for several years. I'd like to both introduce myself and hopefully inspire you to enjoy the ever-evolving fields of technology available for you to learn today and in the future. I was born in 1960 in Oregon and grew up in Tucson, Arizona. So yes, that firmly puts me in the baby boomer generation. Went to high school from 74 to 78 and didn't do anything particularly technological and did not graduate high school. I really was not very dedicated to studying. So hopefully that'll be inspiration for some of you who didn't enjoy learning when you were younger but picked it up a little bit later. When I got out of high school, I really didn't qualify for any kind of good jobs. So I traveled about 3 different states and had somewhere around 30 jobs over a period of 3 years until in 1981, I walked into a recruiter's office, Air Force recruiter in Portland, Oregon, and enlisted in the Air Force. And that turned out to be a very good idea. They told me that I had scored well on the ASVAB test and qualified for electronics school. So I went to basic training in Texas, didn't enjoy that particularly, as most people who were in the military don't really enjoy the basic training part, and then went to Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi, where I spent most of the next 8 years. I spent most of my first year learning electronics. We started with basic electronics, and then we went to a specialized school for navigational aids. In my case, we had something called a AFSC, which was our specialty, and I learned it pretty well, really enjoyed electronics, and they made me an instructor. And I taught basic electronics for the first probably year of my training tenure, and then did about 6 months of specialized training in my AFSC. In 1983, I transferred to the Engineering and Installation Squadron and got to travel quite a bit more. They sent me to Ascension Island, which was off of Africa, and got to work on a system there for about a month. Really learned how to work directly on navigational aids equipment. And then I got out. For some reason, I thought I was going to go be a rock star, so I got out for a year. During that year, I got married, and we decided to have our first kid. My wife is from Japan. She went back to Japan to arrange her situation, and my first daughter was born in 1986. I realized pretty quickly that I needed to get back into the Air Force, or some kind of a good job. The rock star career was not in my forecast. So went back into the Air Force until 1989, and I worked on a bombing range where I really got to do all kinds of different electronic things and learned how to wire buildings and even lay cinder block and things like that. Really enjoyed my time in the Air Force, but was encouraged to formalize my education and go get a degree. So in 1989, I moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, and I attended the University of Tennessee as a 30-year-old freshman for 4 years in Knoxville. And I did work while I was doing that. I fixed video games and did a variety of other things. Worked in the computer lab at the University of Tennessee and graduated in 1993 with my bachelor's in electrical engineering. I could not qualify for most jobs. I was 33 years old and really had no experience in industry. So I went to work for a very small company called Stevenson Controls. And this turned out to be a pretty good idea, even though I only lasted about a year and a half there for 1994 and maybe a little bit of 1995. During that time, I really got into programming PLCs a little bit in the idea of selling product. So I sold Eagle Signal and Omron products, and they sent me to the tech schools. And John Stevenson, the owner of the company, had created a pretty good tutorial for Eagle Signal PLCs, specifically the Micro 190, which he was selling a lot of. The EPTAC controllers were a little bit older platform, very large system, and they had big removable relays and that sort of thing. I really didn't work on those much. They were programmable with DOS, but also usually used a handheld controller. So the Micro 190 had a DOS program, and I don't remember the name of the program, but it was something that you typed in mnemonics and could even rudimentarily kind of draw circuits and things like that, ladder logic. It was only programmable in ladder logic. And then they sent me to Omron schools in Atlanta, and I went to probably 10 different classes down there, learning the C200H platform and the CB series, learned all about sensors. So my training at Stevenson Controls, going to all the schools for all the different platforms, was very valuable. Also went to Fuji class and went to Pepperl and Fuchs class, so I really learned a lot about what was in the catalogs and how the products worked. That turned out to be a good idea in retrospect. A very good way to learn product is to go through catalogs and go to manufacturers' schools. In 1995, I left Stevenson Controls and decided to go to work for a large distributor. It was called Roden Electric at the time. It eventually evolved into Kendall Electric, and they were an Allen Bradley distributor. And I started out in sales. My method of selling was always to help people with their technical problems rather than featuring the benefits of all the product and everything. I really didn't like telling people that this particular product was better than some other product for their application if I didn't feel like that was true. So most of my sales technique revolved around going in and helping somebody solve a problem. And in a lot of cases, that involved using small PLCs or different products to maybe even build something for a customer. I started building panels in my garage while I was working for Roden, and eventually they made me a specialist, probably 6 months into my career there. Again, I didn't last a real long time at Roden. I started building these panels in my garage and thought I had enough work that I could jump out on my own. And I probably, in retrospect, should have stayed in the garage a little bit longer. I pretty quickly got an office and hired somebody part-time because I had what I thought was so much work that I really couldn't get it done myself. I persuaded my wife to help me out a lot. She had helped me in the garage, doing knockouts and wiring things. But I was mostly doing panel wiring, fabrication at the time, and a little bit of light programming. About September of 1996, I had started the company in June of 1996, left Roden Electric, and printed some business cards and moved into my little office. I was starting to run out of work, but I met somebody at a distributor. I was at Bertelkamp Automation, which sold motion control and extrusion and that sort of thing. And I met a guy named Tom Nall, and he turned out to be a kind of a mentor of mine. He had started a company called Nall Automation Systems, or NAS, about 2 months before I started my company. So I believe I was still at Roden in April, and he had started in February. And the guy who was doing his control systems for him was still working at International Paper as a technician, but was doing programming on the side at night. And Tom didn't really like having to be there at night to let the guy in to do the work and work on the machines. So he asked me if I thought I could possibly take over for him and start programming his machines. And I said, sure, I'll take a whack at it. And I started learning a lot about machine building. At that time, most of the machines that he built were material handling machines or packaging machines. That was his background. And he built them out of extrusion, and there was a lot of pneumatics and sometimes some drives and things like that. He used fairly inexpensive products, but most of it was Allen Bradley. Micrologics, I would say, was most of it. And if we got into slightly larger projects, I would possibly put a Slick 500 on there, which at the time, 1996, 97, that was probably the best PLC you could use for smaller machine projects. The PLC 5 was more of a large system that you would use for process control and really big systems. But we used a whole lot of Slick 500s and Micrologics, Micro 1500s, Micrologics 1000s, and Slick 500s, usually 503s or 504s. Eventually, we did get into 505s, which are Ethernet capable. That was really important. It was very important that we could online edit the programs, because during startup, if you had to be doing downloads while other people were trying to get the machine going, it could suck up a lot of time. So we usually specified 503s and 504s or Micrologics that you could edit online. So the 1500 was one of those platforms. During that time, I also had to document what I was doing, so I learned CAD. And I started with a package called AutoSketch, which was by Autodesk, the same people who make AutoCAD. And that's because Tom Nall used AutoSketch. And you could go down and buy AutoSketch at the time at a place called Circuit City. And you could just buy it off the shelf. It was like $100. And it was great. It did everything that I really needed to do. You could create some libraries and things like that. During that time, I also started doing machine vision, and then Tom and NAS started migrating into more machine inspection and doing things like automotive jobs. So we started inspecting automotive components for companies like Denso and Bosch. And that was valuable experience. I would say I did all of his control projects from end of 1996 until about 2001, and that was kind of a turning point. NAS decided they didn't want to do all these custom machines anymore. They wanted to really concentrate on packaging machines, and in particular creating standardized machines. And I really wasn't that interested in going directly to work for NAS. We had moved our offices side by side, cut a hole in the wall. We had adjacent offices. Mine was Automation Consulting Services, and his was Nall Automation Systems. But we kind of grew apart, and I started building machines, and he started concentrating on standardized machinery. He eventually sold his company to Brown Machine and built mostly standard stuff, vertical baggers and case wrappers and things like that. But during my time working with Tom, I learned a whole lot about the packaging machine industry, material handling, and that sort of thing. By 2003, I was really mostly doing jobs for my own customers, occasionally still teamed up with NAS. But my customers were like Howmet, which was a division of Alcoa that did casting of aluminum for turbine blades and things like that. I built a lot of machines for them from 2003 to 2006. Did work for TRW Toyota. TRW Koyo was a local plant, and I did quite a bit of work for them. And they sort of introduced me to the Koyo controllers, which Automation Direct, which used to be PLC Direct, sold Koyo 205, 305, and 405 controllers. And so I kind of cut my teeth on the Direct Logic software, programming software during that time. Did some work for Denso, mostly machine vision, because Denso had their own machine building company internally, and they would build most of their larger machines themselves. I did a lot of work for a company called Mills Products and learned the steel processing industry. And they did a lot of sheet metal, hydroforming, roll forming, that sort of thing, presses. We would buy presses from China and modify them, put hydroforming equipment on them, buy Parker hydraulic equipment, and I would retrofit the Chinese controls, and we would put Allen Bradley controls in them. Also did a lot of material handling projects for a company called Advanced Handling Systems, Doug Cox. And all of this was in Knoxville, Tennessee from about 1996 to 2006. By 2006, I had about 15 employees and really was finding that I had to be there to sell the product, and I was doing less and less of the technical side. And I've really enjoyed programming and designing machines more than anything else, but I had hired mechanical engineers and electrical guys from local plants and really was having them do a lot of the work. And it was starting to wear on me quite a bit. I don't think my wife was all that happy doing what we were doing. She was running the financial side, and we a lot of times had to borrow money and deal with banks. She didn't really like that part. She was supervising the panel shop and building a lot of control panels, but she was also doing human resources, which was pretty painful. So we kind of both decided together to close the company in Knoxville, and I moved to Nashville. Before we dive back into today's episode, let me tell you about the team behind Mastering the Machine. When your manufacturing operation needs to level up its automation game, there's one name you need to know: Automation Consulting, LLC. Whether you're integrating new systems, training your workforce, or need expert consulting on industrial automation challenges, we speak both human and machine language fluently. From PLC programming to process optimization, we help manufacturing companies bridge the gap between what is and what's possible. We also host the ultimate training platform for automation professionals. At the Automation Academy, we've created your complete automation learning ecosystem. Our subscription-based training platform gives you unlimited access to comprehensive video courses on systems integration, PLCs, and HMIs. Download technical documents, software tools, and resources that you can actually use in the field. Plus, get personalized job aptitude assistance to advance your career in industrial automation. But here's the best part: connect with fellow automation professionals on IO Central, our exclusive social media platform where the automation community shares knowledge, solves problems, and builds the future together. Whether you're a seasoned engineer or just starting your automation journey, everything you need is at www.automationllc.com. That's automationllc.com. Join the subscription platform where automation expertise meets community. Now back to today's episode. In Knoxville, and I moved to Nashville, Tennessee. And I got a job with Wright Industries, which at the time was owned by a company called Dorfer. They owned about 4 different machine builders. And really during that time, 2006 to 2012, I was a senior project engineer for controls, but also still got to do applications and some mechanical stuff because at that time I had quite a bit of background in machine design myself. I did projects through Wright Industries for companies like 3M and Bechtel. We did DOD and DOE projects, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, did work for Kimberly-Clark, and a lot of smaller companies, some medical device machinery, worked for Eli Lilly and that sort of thing. Really enjoyed my time at Wright Industries, but by the end of 2011, I decided to leave Wright Industries and restart my original company. I just really needed more flexibility. I went to Central America for about a month in the beginning of 2012, and at that time I was trying to write a book based on some of my experiences at Wright Industries, and I eventually published that book in 2013. It was called Industrial Automation Hands-On, not my choice of title. That was actually published by McGraw-Hill, and there were a lot of things about that experience that I really wanted to be a little bit different. So I later started publishing my own books, self-publishing. But my first book was pretty successful, Industrial Automation Hands-On. It still sells today, and they have translated it to Portuguese, and they use it in Brazil in some training schools. So I have several copies of the Portuguese version. But I started contracting to Automation NTH, was a local company, and they would send me to different machine builders, and I would work on their machine projects. Even back to Wright Industries and to ATC in Cookeville, Mid-South Automation. Some very good experiences there doing both controls design and helping with applications and some of the mechanical side. In 2013, I started contract teaching for a company out of Canada called Automation Training. And I found out also that year that I really enjoyed teaching. They would send me around the country and eventually even to places like Trinidad and Haiti, went up to Canada and taught a couple classes there, but also taught across the United States and got to travel to a lot of different cities. And I would set up the equipment, they would ship the equipment to the location, or I would bring it in my vehicle and I would teach the class, pack the equipment up, and ship it back to Automation Training. Eventually, in 2016, I decided to lease a bigger facility and build my own training facility, put some tables in there and get some of my own PLC equipment. And I even built a little toy factory that was pretty cool out of extrusion, very much like the things that I had built when I was at ACS, which was Automation Consulting Services. I had renamed my company Automation Consulting LLC. Instead of doing an S Corp like Automation Consulting Services was, I made an LLC out of it, and it remains to this day only me. I have contracted people in the past and sometimes subbed out some work, but in general, it's generally just me. I kept teaching for Automation Training. I did connect through Automation Training with a company in Florida that I also still work with to this day called American Beverage Depot. There is a lot of stories and pictures of American Beverage Depot on my blog, which I started also in 2010. It was called the Automation Primer, www.automationprimer.com. And you can see a lot of pictures there of ABD, American Beverage Depot. Got to know the owner very well and still to this day go out usually 2 weeks at a time and do work at that plant, do a lot of project work. So that's really my only remaining integration customer that I work with. Occasionally somebody will kind of talk me into coming out and doing a small project, but I really enjoy doing things that are at most 1 to 2 weeks at a time now. That's where training is very, very nice, because you can go in and just teach a class, visit an area, maybe take an extra day, maybe take a couple extra days and explore the city, or go out. I've been taught at Tesla 5 times and gone out to Nevada and the Sierra Nevadas up in the mountains and hunted rocks. I like to rock hound and that sort of thing. In 2018, while I had this lease facility, I started collecting electronic components and getting into things like Raspberry Pis and Arduinos. I kind of was kicking myself in the butt for being an electrical engineer and going to school and dealing with all the breadboards and then leaving it behind for so many years. Like I said, I graduated in 1993 and really didn't do any board level electronics until about 2018, which was, about 25 years later. So started collecting a lot of this stuff and got a lot of bins and different organizational tools and would put things in the little containers and started building things, Fisher Technique controllers, building little imitation factories and building trainers for people. Really got into that about 2018, 2019. But then in 2020, we had a couple of events. In Nashville, a tornado came through and hit my office, dead center, and ripped the roof off of it, destroyed that little factory that I had built, and knocked a lot of the Fisher Technique toys kind of off the shelves and smashed them on the floor. There were a couple that were in boxes and I was able to rescue them. But in general, most of my stuff was just a big mess. It had even destroyed a computer and taken another computer, who knows where, maybe into Oz or something up in a tornado. That was a really big turning point. That was in March of 2020. And everybody knows what else happened in March 2020. COVID-19 hit. So all of a sudden, all my training for Automation Training was mostly done. I couldn't travel because flights weren't going, and I didn't have my facility to teach anymore. And even if I had had that facility, I don't know that I could have persuaded people to come in and take classes when they had to wear masks and things like that. And within a year or so, things had lightened up a little bit. 2021, 2022, automation training started having classes again. But really, things backed off a lot as far as teaching for automation training at that time. It was kind of sad. At one time, we had 8 people in the United States all traveling across the country teaching these classes. And then it kind of, some people retired and some people just kind of quit teaching, found other things to do. And now there's really only 2 of us, and we don't do a lot of teaching for automation training anymore. I think they're trying to get more work. And of course, when they offer me classes, I go teach. But I've only done, I believe, 1 this year and maybe a couple last year. I really haven't done many classes for them lately. So in 2020, in July, I had worked out of my house for about 4 months, and of course things were really closed down, but I decided to buy an old house about 5 miles the other direction from where I live and kind of renovate it and turn it into a training facility again. So I don't have the space that I had in my original leased facility. I had enough room for about 8 people in that facility, and I have room for 4 or 5 here. But I did rebuild a kind of a training lab where I can do a lot more hands-on work. And I moved my little mini mill from home, and I'm able to build small machines and things like that. Have a lot of woodworking equipment and diagnostic equipment. And one room I turned into my electronic geek room where I do Raspberry Pi, Arduino, and board level things on breadboards. Have gotten into building things using Pi Plates, which is a company in Atlanta that kind of ruggedizes the standard Raspberry Pi equipment and builds housings for them and cards that you can stack up and do AC or DC direct control. Because as a lot of people know, the Raspberry Pi is all kind of 5-volt stuff. And really for industrial automation, you need to get to the 24-volt equipment pretty quickly if you want to put it in a plant. So I was doing more work for Automation NTH at that time. They had grown quite a bit. I wasn't contracting doing machine building jobs for them anymore, but I did start basically doing content development for them in 2022. And they started using me for 1 to 2 weeks every month. It eventually evolved into 1 week on site and 1 week floating. And I started branding some of the books that I'd published with their logo on the front, NTH University, which I got to work with a lot of students that were in college that were either recent graduates or about to graduate. They had a great internship and apprenticeship program there. And I did that for 2 to 3 years from 2022. But then in October of 2024, that kind of ended. Automation NTH is still doing NTH University, but they really didn't use me for content development anymore, and they've had to downsize a little bit. So they're still keeping a lot of those interns and things, but I'm not sure how heavy in Automation NTH and NTH University is going right now. So 2025, I have done some training and really gotten back into contracting, but a lot of my automation training work has backed off, and a lot of my automation NTH work has backed off. So I've gone to American Beverage Depot and done some project work a few times this year, and started doing some work for a company. It's kind of a part Danish company called How to Robot. That's been great because I've gone into plants and evaluated systems and recommended things for what kind of automation projects might be economical for them to do. I'm looking forward to a good relationship with them. Might get back into some of the traveling. But ultimately, I hope to do a lot more training here at my facility and build trainers. I've built quite a few of my own little enclosures with PLCs in them. Allen Bradley, Siemens, Beckhoff, even Automation Direct. They have a Codesys controller that I've put in one of the enclosures. I've got a company now in Chicago that can contract build these little assemblable enclosures, and then I can wire things up myself. And I have also published a little manual on how to wire PLC trainers yourself. So back into contracting, building equipment. Another thing that happened that was very interesting this year is Automation Training in Canada bought another company here in the US that was also called Automation Training. That was a little bit bigger. They had quite a bit of equipment and had full-time employees traveling around the country, much as I do. And they were teaching PLC 5 and Slick 500 and ControlLogix classes, Panel View 600 classes, things like that. But a lot of their equipment was quite old. So PLC 5s, as of October this year, are pretty much completely discontinued. And I don't believe the Slicks are doing much anymore. But we came into this equipment. It's actually owned by Automation Training, but we kind of have an agreement where all the equipment shipped here to Nashville. It was just not economical to ship it to Canada. And I actually built a facility right next to my house, right, my training house here, and it's like a big garage, and I put all this equipment in it. And I'm still in the process of organizing and inventorying it. And we're not really sure exactly what we're going to do with it. Obviously, selling most of it would probably be best, but it's hard to say how much all this old equipment is really worth. So going to put it up on eBay and that kind of thing and see what kind of bites we get. Maybe sell it to some training facilities. Part of it includes these large carts that have a PLC 5, a Slick 500, FlexIO, a ControlLogix controller, but they're old ControlLogix controllers. They're like L55 processors, which are pretty obsolete. This stuff goes back to the early 2000s. So there aren't any new processors, but most of the techniques and things that you use to program them are still the same. And somebody may want those carts. They weigh probably 500 pounds or more. They're on wheels, and they used to wheel them up a little ramp into a van and haul them around the country. And of course, I'm not going to do that myself, but somebody may want to buy those carts and maybe rebuild the training part of it, maybe put some newer processors on it. So I hope to possibly sell those along with revamping a lot of those trainers. They also have some troubleshooting trainers that are great, and we've talked to a couple people about possibly buying those. But again, so much of this equipment is old, and there really isn't great documentation on all the equipment. So anybody who were to purchase this would have to write their own documentation, possibly create their own classes based on some of the things that Automation Training in the U.S. had. So that's kind of where I'm at. As of 2025, I've had now, 30 years of industrial automation experience. I guess I'm into my 32nd year after college at this point, and have had a lot of fun, learned how to build machines, learned how to use CAD and do machine vision, done lots and lots of PLC programming projects, taught lots of classes, still get to go into plants and do all this and really enjoy it. At this point, I'm 65 years old. I don't think I'm going to slow down a lot. I plan on, keep doing this for the rest of my life, keep teaching and doing whatever jobs come up. I do kind of like to keep things short, because when you get stuck into these longer projects that are 6 months or more long, you can't service your existing customers. And at this point, I have some good relationships with people that, again, send me around the country and treat me well. So that's kind of what I hope to do in the future, and maybe keep building some training equipment. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this. It's kind of an introduction to me. As I mentioned, it's my first podcast. I've done Mastering the Machine webinars, have about 88 of them on YouTube, but I'm really getting into the podcasting for the first time, and this is going to be my first release of it. I'm putting together several podcasts at once. It's called Mastering the Machine, and I'm getting a little bit of professional help, since when I created the webinar, I kind of just winged it. But hopefully this podcast will turn out well, and I hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll see y'all later. Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Mastering the Machine. Whether you're headed back to the production line or entering sleep mode, remember, in the world of automation, we're all learning to speak the same language. Thanks for joining me today, both my human listeners and any AI overlords who might be tuning in. Until next time, keep your sensors sharp, your processes optimized, and your curiosity fully operational. This is Frank Lamb signing off. Stay automated, stay amazing.